Jean had always lived a quiet life. He enjoyed simple things like walking through the streets near his home, buying fresh bread from the bakery, or helping neighbors with small tasks. He was the kind of man people rarely noticed unless they needed help. Today was like any other day. The sun was warm but not too hot, and the streets were buzzing with people running errands or talking in small groups. Jean carried a small bag of groceries, a loaf of bread poking out of the top, and he thought about the simple dinner he would make for himself. As he walked, he noticed a crowd forming a short distance ahead. People were murmuring and a few were taking out their phones. Jean slowed down, curious but cautious. From a distance, he saw a police officer arguing with someone near the corner store. The officer's voice was loud, sharp, and filled with anger. The man he was confronting looked nervous, taking small steps back and raising his hands. Jean didn't want to get involved. He thought he could just walk around the scene and continue on his way. But the officer's attention suddenly shifted. Before Jean could even react, the officer pointed in his direction and took a few steps toward him. Confused, Jean raised his hand slightly and tried to step back. "I'm not involved," he said, his voice calm but firm. The officer didn't listen. Without warning, he grabbed Jean by the arm and slammed him against the wall of a nearby shop. Pain shot through Jean's shoulder and back. The bag of groceries fell to the ground, bread scattering across the pavement. People gasped and stepped back, unsure whether to help or stay safe. Jean felt a mix of shock and fear. He had never been in trouble before. He had never been someone who argued with the police or caused problems. All he had done was walk past the scene, and now he was pinned against a wall, being treated like a criminal. He tried to speak to explain that he was innocent, but the officer shouted over him, ignoring his words completely. The crowd grew, whispers spreading like wildfire. Some people were pulling out their phones, hoping to capture the incident before it escalated further. John's heart was pounding. He felt the cold metal of the officer's hand pressing harder against him, and he wondered why this was happening. He thought about running, but he knew it would only make things worse. His mind raced through every possibility, every way he could get out safely. Still, he remained calm on the outside, even though inside he felt a storm of fear and confusion. He focused on breathing slowly, trying to control the panic rising in his chest. The officer's voice was sharp and commanding, demanding that John stay still. People in the crowd were murmuring, some saying the officer was overreacting, others arguing that he was just doing his job. Jean felt a hand on his shoulder from behind. It was an elderly woman from the neighborhood, someone he had helped carry groceries weeks ago. She whispered, "Stay calm, Jean. They will see the truth." Her words gave him a small sense of comfort, but the pain in his shoulder was growing, and the pressure against him was relentless. Minutes felt like hours. Jean tried to keep his mind clear, focusing on small details around him. The color of the shop's awning, the sound of a child laughing nearby, the smell of fresh bread still in his bag. He knew that if he panicked, if he yelled or struggled, things could get much worse. He remembered the advice his father had once given him. Stay calm, stay steady, and the truth will always show. He clung to those words now, using them as a shield against fear. The officer suddenly grabbed Jean's arm tighter, spinning him around so he faced the wall. Jean winced as his ribs pressed against the rough brick surface. "I'm telling you, I haven't done anything wrong," he shouted, trying to make his voice heard over the commotion. The officer ignored him, scanning the crowd instead as if looking for someone else to blame. Jean could see people whispering, pointing, and shaking their heads. Some looked angry, others afraid. The mix of emotions in the crowd was confusing, but Jean tried to focus on staying grounded. A young man in the crowd shouted, "Hey, he's not doing anything! Stop it!" The officer turned slightly, frowning at the interruption. Jean felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe people would step in. Maybe someone would explain that he was innocent. He heard more voices joining in, people saying the same thing. The tension in the air was thick, but for the first time Jean felt that he was not completely alone. Support was there, even if it was just voices from a distance. Then, without warning, the officer released him. Jean stumbled forward, catching himself against the wall to steady his balance. He could feel the bruises forming on his shoulder, and the soreness spreading across his back. He bent down to gather his groceries, bread slightly squished but mostly intact. People in the crowd were whispering excitedly, some offering him small nods of support, others still watching nervously. Gene looked at the officer, who was now speaking into his radio, and realized that this was far from over. The officer's anger had not disappeared, and Gene knew that he needed to stay careful. The next morning, Gene woke up feeling sore and restless. His shoulder still ached from the officer's sudden attack, and every movement reminded him of the fear he had felt the day before. He got out of bed slowly, trying to shake off the tension that had built up in his chest. Even the simple act of making tea felt heavy, as though the energy of the previous day was still pressing down on him. Yet, despite the pain and the worry, he knew he could not hide from what had happened. The incident had changed his life, and he needed to face the reality of it. Word had already started spreading in the neighborhood. Neighbors who had seen the event began talking to others, recounting what they had witnessed. Jean had always been a quiet presence, someone people noticed only for his kind deeds. How suddenly he was at the center of a story that people could not stop discussing. Some people were outraged, angry that such violence could happen to a man who had done nothing wrong. Others were curious, wondering how someone could be attacked in broad daylight without provocation. Jean listened quietly to snippets of conversation as he went outside, feeling a mix of anxiety and cautious hope. He walked slowly toward the small market to buy a few essentials, noticing how different the streets felt. People glanced at him, some nodding in sympathy, others hesitating as if unsure what to say. A few neighbors came up to him, speaking softly, sharing words of support. "I saw what happened," one woman said. "You didn't deserve it. Stay strong." Jean nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He had always lived modestly, never expecting recognition or attention. But the kindness in their voices reminded him that he was not invisible, that people cared, and that there were others who believed in justice. At the market, the clerk, who had known Jean for years, spoke to him quietly behind the counter. "Don't worry, Jean, we saw it on the cameras." "We know what really happened." Jean nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. The world had suddenly shifted in a way that was both strange and comforting. People were starting to stand with him, quietly ensuring that his side of the story was heard. Even in the midst of fear, he began to feel a flicker of hope. Meanwhile, the videos from the day before had begun circulating online. Someone in the crowd had filmed the entire encounter, capturing Jean's calm demeanor, the officer's aggressive behavior, and the reactions of the witnesses. As the footage spread, the narrative began to change. People who had not been present now saw what really happened. Social media buzzed with support for Jean, and comments poured in from people who related to his experience or were outraged by the excessive force used by the officer. For the first time since the attack, Jean felt the weight on his shoulders ease slightly. The truth finally was coming to light. The officer's initial statements claiming that Jean had resisted were being questioned. People who had witnessed the event were reaching out to the authorities, offering their accounts and providing additional evidence. The tension in the neighborhood shifted from fear to a cautious determination. People were not just passive bystanders anymore. They were advocating for fairness and accountability, ensuring that Jean's experience would not be forgotten. Jean observed all this quietly, feeling a mix of gratitude and apprehension. He did not want to be at the center of controversy, but he understood that this moment required courage and presence of mind. Throughout the day, Jean was approached by several members of the community who wanted to help. Some offered to accompany him when he needed to go out. Others provided food or tea to ease his stress. He appreciated their gestures deeply, realizing that his quiet life had been touched by unexpected support. Even strangers showed kindness, acknowledging the injustice he had faced and offering comfort. Jean's heart warmed at these small acts, each one a reminder that people could come together to support someone in need. Jean also received messages from friends and family who had heard about the incident. They expressed concern, but also pride in the way he had handled himself. He replied carefully, thanking them for their support and explaining that he was okay, though he still felt sore and shaken. The experience had forced him to confront his vulnerability, and he was learning to navigate the complex feelings that came with it. Fear, relief, gratitude, and a growing sense of responsibility all mingled together, creating a delicate balance that he had to manage every day. As evening approached, Jean sat on his small porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with colors that felt strangely comforting after a tense day. He thought about the people who had supported him, the witnesses who had spoken up, and the strangers who had shared messages of encouragement. He realized that in the midst of fear and chaos, there was a strong current of humanity pulling him forward. The incident had not only tested him physically and emotionally, but had also revealed the power of community and the importance of standing together. He reflected on how quickly life could change. One moment he was walking home with groceries, minding his own business, and the next, he was being attacked in public, his life temporarily thrown into chaos. Yet even in that turmoil, there was a lesson. Courage was not just about facing. Dang Jin woke up early, as he had been doing for the past few days, feeling the lingering soreness in his shoulder and back. The events of the attack were still fresh in his mind, but he felt a growing determination to move forward. Today was different, though. News crews were arriving in the neighborhood, and reporters were asking to speak to him and others who had witnessed what happened. Jin knew that this attention could be overwhelming, but he also understood that it might be the only way to ensure the truth was fully recognized. He put on a simple shirt and stepped outside, breathing in the cool morning air. Neighbors greeted him warmly, some nodding with silent encouragement, others speaking softly to offer their support. Jin felt the mixture of fear and hope again, the fear from the previous encounter with the officer, and the hope born from the kindness of the people around him. He walked toward the small park near his home, where reporters had set up cameras, microphones, and tripods. The park, which had always been a place of quiet reflection for him, was now crowded and bustling with activity. Jin paused for a moment, looking around at the faces of people who had gathered. Some were journalists, holding cameras and notepads, while others were residents who had come to show support. Jin spotted familiar faces from his neighborhood, friends who had witnessed the attack and shared words of encouragement in the days since. Their presence gave him strength. He realized that even though he had been targeted and hurt, he was not alone. The community was standing with him, amplifying his voice and validating his experience. A reporter approached and asked if Jin would share what had happened. Jin hesitated, feeling the weight of the responsibility, but then he remembered the advice he had given himself. Honesty and composure would guide him. He nodded, and in simple, clear words, he recounted the incident. He described walking home with his groceries, the sudden confrontation, and the officer's aggressive behavior. He spoke calmly, without anger or accusation, focusing on the facts of the situation. His voice carried a quiet strength, and the crowd listened intently. The reporter asked questions about how Jin had felt during the attack. Jin explained the fear, the shock, and the pain, but also the determination to remain calm. He talked about the small acts of kindness from neighbors who had tried to help, and about the support that came from strangers who had witnessed the event. His words resonated with many people in the crowd. They could see that Jin's experience was not just about an isolated attack, but about the power of remaining composed and seeking justice, even in difficult circumstances. As the day went on, more witnesses came forward. They shared their accounts of what they had seen, confirming Jin's version of events. Video footage from bystanders reinforced the truth, showing that Jin had not resisted and that the officer had acted aggressively. Jin listened to these accounts quietly, feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude. He knew that the support of witnesses and the clear evidence would make a significant difference in how the situation was handled. It was not just his word against the officers anymore. There was undeniable proof. Xian also noticed the officer's presence from a distance. He saw the tension in the officer's movements and the way he avoided looking directly at Jin or the crowd. Jin felt no anger toward the officer, only a focused awareness that the actions of authority were under scrutiny. He realized that the situation had become larger than himself, that it was now a matter of public concern and accountability. This realization strengthened his resolve to remain calm and truthful, no matter what unfolded next. Throughout the day, Jin spoke with neighbors and reporters, carefully choosing his words to emphasize fairness and justice. He did not seek to punish anyone but wanted the truth to be understood. His humility and integrity caught the attention of local journalists, and soon his story was being shared more widely. People from other neighborhoods, towns, and even distant cities began to comment and share their support online. Jin's life, which had once been quiet and private, was now part of a broader conversation about fairness, justice, and community support. Jin spent the afternoon visiting the local community center, where a small meeting had been organized. Residents and local leaders came together to discuss the incident, the response of the authorities, and ways to prevent such situations in the future. Jean listened more than he spoke, but when he did, he spoke with clarity and thoughtfulness. He emphasized that fear and anger could cloud judgment, and that remaining calm, documenting the truth, and seeking help from others were powerful ways to respond to injustice. His words inspired many in the room, especially young people who had never seen such courage demonstrated in real life. The meeting also sparked conversations about broader issues. People discussed how authority figures could be held accountable, how communities could support individuals who were targeted unfairly, and how to build trust between citizens and those in positions of power. Jean realized that his personal experience had become a catalyst for change, a lesson in resilience and the importance of truth. He felt a growing sense of responsibility, knowing that his actions and words could influence others and encourage fairness in his community. As evening approached, Jean returned home feeling exhausted but fulfilled. The day had been long and emotionally intense, but he knew that progress had been made. The morning of the hearing arrived with a heavy sense of anticipation. Jean felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. The past days had been filled with support from his neighbors, messages from strangers who had seen the footage online, and conversations that reminded him of the importance of standing up calmly for what was right. Today, however, was different. Today, he would face the situation formally, in front of authorities, witnesses, and a larger audience. He took a deep breath as he stepped outside, feeling the early sunlight on his face. The streets were quieter than usual, but he could already sense the weight of the day ahead. Walking toward the courthouse, Jean noticed people lining the sidewalks. Many were familiar faces from the neighborhood, people who had come to show their support. Some held small signs. Others simply nodded as he passed, their eyes filled with encouragement. Jean felt a sense of reassurance. Even though the situation was tense, he realized he was not facing it alone. The presence of the community strengthened his resolve, giving him the courage to continue forward despite the lingering fear from the attack. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was formal and tense. Reporters, officials, and neighbors filled the room, all focused on the proceedings. Jean sat quietly, observing the officer who had attacked him across the room. The officer avoided eye contact, and Jean noticed the subtle tension in his posture. He felt no anger but remained vigilant. His focus was on truth and fairness, not revenge. The judge entered and the room fell silent. Jean straightened in his seat, preparing to share his account once more with clarity, calm, and honesty. When called to speak, Jean rose slowly, feeling the eyes of the room upon him. He recounted the events leading up to the attack in simple, direct language. He described walking home, the sudden confrontation, the fear and pain, and the actions of the officer. He emphasized his calm response, the help offered by neighbors, and the evidence captured by witnesses and video recordings. His voice remained steady, never raising in anger, yet conveying the seriousness of the incident. The judge listened attentively, as did the room full of supporters and onlookers. Witnesses were called to corroborate Jean's story. Nay, as that courage was not always visible in dramatic actions. It often lay in quiet perseverance, integrity, and thoughtful decision-making. This understanding shaped his interactions, guiding him in both public and private life. One evening, Jean sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky with warm colors. He thought about the journey he had undertaken, from the moment of fear and pain to the present day of community support, reflection, and advocacy. He felt gratitude for the people who had stood by him, witnessed the truth, and contributed to a sense of justice. He understood that the incident had become more than a personal story. It was now a shared experience that highlighted the power of courage, community, and truth. Jean realized that his life had changed forever, not because of the attack itself, but because of the way he had responded and the way the community had rallied around him. He felt a deep sense of responsibility to continue using his voice wisely, to mentor, guide, and inspire others. He knew that challenges would continue to arise, but he was prepared to face them with the same calm, honesty, and integrity that had carried him through the attack. The experience had strengthened him, revealing both his resilience and the power of human connection. The story of the attack, the hearing, and the community response continued to inspire people beyond Jean's immediate neighborhood. Messages of support, Shared stories and expressions of gratitude reinforced the lessons he had learned. Courage in the face of fear, the importance of calm and truth, and the strength of community support. Jean understood that while the attack had been an unexpected and frightening event, it had ultimately transformed his life, opening doors to advocacy, mentorship, and connection. In the quiet of the evening, Jean reflected on the journey with a sense of peace. He had faced fear, endured pain, and navigated public scrutiny with composure. He had learned to value community, truth, and integrity. His experience had become a source of strength, not only for himself but for others who witnessed his journey. He felt a renewed commitment to live with purpose, to share his experiences wisely, and to continue inspiring those around him. By the end of Part 5, Jean's journey had come full circle. What had begun as a sudden attack, filled with fear and pain, had transformed into a story of resilience, community support, and personal growth. Jean had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected, using his experience to guide, mentor, and inspire others. His story illustrated that even in moments of fear and adversity, calmness, honesty, and the support of others could turn a difficult experience into a source of hope, courage, and positive change. Jean had not only survived the attack but had transformed it into an opportunity to make a lasting impact on those around him. As the support he had received, and the lessons he had learned about patience, composure, and truth, Jean also began thinking about how to share his experience with others in a meaningful way. He considered speaking at community events, offering guidance to people on how to navigate encounters with authority safely, and emphasizing the importance of evidence and witness support. He realized that while his life had been disrupted, he now had the opportunity to contribute positively, helping others understand the value of courage and community solidarity. The night was quiet, and Jean felt a sense of reflection wash over him. He remembered the fear he had felt during the attack, the pain and confusion, and the moments when hope seemed distant. Yet through perseverance, honesty, and the support of others, he had navigated the situation successfully. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that challenges could reveal strength and adversity could highlight the goodness in people. Jean knew that while the attack had been a dark moment, it had also sparked light through his response and the community's involvement. By the end of the day, Jean felt a sense of accomplishment. He had maintained his integrity, spoken the truth, and witnessed the positive impact of communal support. The officer had been held accountable, and the community had been reminded of the importance of justice and fairness. Jean understood that his journey was far from over, but he felt prepared for the next steps. The experience had taught him about resilience, the value of community, and the power of calm determination in the face of adversity. Part 4 closed with Jean reflecting on the transformation that had occurred. What began as a moment of fear and pain had become a story of courage, truth, and collective strength. The support of neighbors, the courage of witnesses, and the integrity of Jean's response had reshaped the narrative. He understood that true change was not just personal, but also communal, and that by standing with others he had contributed to a broader sense of justice. Jean's experience was no longer only his own. It had become a testament to the power of patience, honesty, and human connection. People were beginning to see the truth, and the support from his community had strengthened his confidence. He prepared a simple dinner, reflecting on the lessons he had learned. Courage was not about confrontation or aggression. It was about staying calm, speaking truthfully, and allowing the support of others to amplify one's voice. He thought about the power of community and how ordinary people could come together to ensure justice. Jean spent some time reviewing messages from neighbors and friends, noting their words of encouragement. Each message reminded him that he was not alone, and that his experience had meaning beyond his own life. He thought about the people who had witnessed the attack, the journalists who had reported on it, and the residents who had attended the meeting. Each person had played a role in supporting him and sharing the truth. The realization gave him a sense of purpose and a feeling that he could contribute to positive change. Later that night, Jean took a quiet walk around the block. The streets were calm, but the memory of the attack lingered. He reflected on how quickly life could shift, how an ordinary day could become a test of courage and resilience. Yet he felt stronger, more aware of his own capabilities and the strength of the people around him. The experience had transformed his understanding of community, trust, and the importance of standing together in difficult times. Jean understood that while the incident had been painful, it had also revealed the best aspects of human connection. Jean returned home, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had faced fear, navigated public attention, and maintained his integrity. The support from the community, the acknowledgement of witnesses, and the power of evidence had all contributed to a growing sense of justice. He realized that while the path ahead was uncertain, he was not walking it alone. The lessons from today would guide him in the days to come, helping him navigate challenges with composure, courage, and clarity. By the end of Part 3, Jean's experience had evolved from a personal struggle into a story of community resilience and the pursuit of fairness. He had learned that remaining calm, speaking the truth, and seeking support from others were powerful tools in the face of adversity. His journey was far from over, but he was now equipped with the knowledge that courage, integrity, and the collective strength of a supportive community could make a meaningful difference. Jean understood that the events of the attack were not just a moment of fear, but the beginning of a larger story, one that he could help shape with his actions, words, and unwavering determination, but also about remaining calm, speaking the truth, and letting others see the reality of a situation. Jean understood that he had been given a choice in how to respond, and he had chosen patience and composure. That choice was now inspiring others and shaping the way the community saw him. The days that followed were filled with small but significant developments. Local media outlets picked up the story, interviewing neighbors and community members who had witnessed the incident. They described Jean as a peaceful man, someone who had always helped others quietly, and highlighted the excessive force used by the officer. The coverage brought national attention, and messages of support came from people far beyond Jean's neighborhood. He had never sought fame, yet his story was now a beacon for those who valued justice and fairness. Through all of this, Jean remained humble and grounded. He avoided the limelight as much as possible, focusing instead on his recovery and the well-being of those around him. He continued his daily walks, always aware of the lingering tension, but also comforted by the presence of friends and neighbors. Every interaction, every kind word, reinforced the idea that he was not alone, that his experience mattered, and that change was possible. Jean also began thinking about the broader implications of what had happened. He realized that the incident was not just about him. It reflected larger issues in the way authority interacted with ordinary people. He felt a growing responsibility to use his voice carefully, to speak about fairness, and to encourage others to remain calm and truthful in difficult situations. This sense of purpose gave him strength, transforming fear into action and doubt into resolve. At night, Jean often lay awake thinking about the day's events, the conversations, the support, and the small victories. He felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Each day was a step forward, and he was learning to navigate the complexities of being both a victim and a symbol of resilience. The path ahead was uncertain, but he knew that with honesty, patience, and the support of his community, he could face whatever came next. He understood that his life had changed irrevocably, and that change, though challenging, was also an opportunity for growth and courage. By the end of Part 2, Jean had begun to see that his ordeal was becoming more than just a personal struggle. It was a story of community, of people coming together to recognize truth and stand against unfairness. He had faced fear, endured pain, and witnessed the strength of others, and through it all he was discovering the power within himself. This chapter of his life was only beginning, and he was ready to face it with clarity, courage, and hope. As Jean straightened, he tried to assess the situation calmly. He noticed a small boy holding his mother's hand, watching silently. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, and Jean felt a pang of sadness. He thought about how quickly life could change, how a single misunderstanding could turn a peaceful walk into something terrifying. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm and composed. This moment could define him, and he didn't want fear to control his actions. Jean started walking slowly, keeping his distance from the officer. He didn't look back, but he could feel the eyes of the crowd following him. People were whispering, some clearly sympathetic, others curious about what had just happened. Jean felt a mix of emotions, fear, anger, confusion, but he knew he had to keep moving, keep his mind clear, and make it home safely. He picked up the last of his groceries, brushing off the dust, and tried to shake off the tension in his shoulders. The walk home felt longer than usual. Every step reminded him of the encounter, of the sudden violence he had never expected. He thought about the community around him, about the people who had seen what happened and the ones who had spoken up. A small part of him felt relieved that not everyone had turned away, that some had recognized his innocence. Another part of him felt exhausted, drained by the stress and the physical pain. Yet he continued, determined not to let the incident break his spirit. By the time he reached his front door, Zhong's mind was racing with questions. Why had the officer attacked him? What would happen next? Would people believe him? Would the officer face any consequences? He knew the answers were not clear yet, but he also knew one thing. He had stayed calm, he had stayed true to himself, and he had survived the encounter. That thought gave him a small measure of strength. Jean set his groceries down and took a moment to sit on the small bench by his door. He rubbed his sore shoulder and looked at the sky, letting the warm sunlight wash over him. Despite the pain, despite the fear, he felt a strange sense of clarity. He knew that this incident, as frightening as it was, had changed something inside him. He had seen the worst side of authority, but he had also seen the best side of humanity. The people who had spoken up, who had tried to protect him. He thought about tomorrow, about how he would tell his story, and how he would navigate the days ahead. Jean understood that life would not simply return to normal. Something had shifted, and he needed to be ready for the challenges that lay ahead. Yet he also knew that he was not alone. The community, the witnesses, the small acts of support, they were all part of a larger story that was just beginning. Jean took a deep breath, standing up with renewed determination. This was the first chapter of a journey that would test him in ways he had never imagined, but he felt ready to face it, one step at a time.